My name is Lauren Williams. I'm Adult and Community Services Manager for the Columbia Public Library, which is part of the Daniel Boone Regional Library System. Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn with Boone County Clerk Brianna Lennon, who's going to share with us what we need to know about voting on November 8th, the upcoming election. And today's Lunch and Learn is co-hosted by the Library, the League of Women Voters of Columbia, Boone County, and the American Association of University Women Columbia Branch. Before we begin our program, just a few Zoom housekeeping items. As usual, to ask questions of our presenter today, we ask that you use the chat feature of Zoom. So if you hover over your Zoom window, you should see that speech bubble icon at the bottom of your screen, or if you're on a tablet or phone or device like that, you may need to tap in the middle of your screen to see those additional tools. We are recording this presentation, so it will be available the next day or two on both the League's YouTube channel and the library's YouTube channel for future viewing, and so you can share it with those who are unable to join us today. And now I'd like to welcome our moderator, League of Women Voters of Columbia Boone County President Barbara Hoppe. Thanks so much, Barbara.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you to the Columbia Public Library, as always, for co-hosting this program. And today we want to say a special thank you to the American Association of University Women, the Columbia branch, for sponsoring this particular Lunch and Learn program as their Holly Burgess Public Policy Forum. The League of Women Voters, Columbia, Boone County, and the AAUW and the Boone County Clerk's Office are all very interested and concerned and want to make sure that every person in Boone County who has a right to vote and wants to vote is able to cast a vote and that their vote will count. Before we get into our program with our special guest speaker, I want to invite Diane Ludwig, the president of the American Association of University Women, to say a few words. Diane?
Thank you, excuse me. Thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Lauren. Yes, one person who would be very excited we were having this program would be Holly Burgess, were she here. Unfortunately, Holly left us in 2014 of cancer at the tender age of 61, which is young to most of us these days. So we do this in her honor. She was very, very tuned in to public policy. She was a member of the League. She was an advocate for the library, and she was a friend of Brianna's. So this is a very opportune time to bring Holly's name up and let you know that our branch does this each year in honor of Holly because of her commitment and passion to public policy. So we thank you for letting us join you on this.
Thank you very much, Diane. And now we are pleased to welcome Brianna Lennon, our Boone County Clerk, who has been clerk since November, or was elected in November of 2018. Brianna has worked before being clerk with the as an assistant attorney general in the Consumer Protection Division in the Missouri Attorney General's office. And after that, Brianna worked with the Missouri Secretary of State's office under former Secretary Jason Kander. And as Deputy Director of Elections and first coordinator of the Elections Integrity Unit in the Secretary of State's office, Brianna worked closely with local election authorities across the state to ensure that elections were simple, secure, and accessible to voters. There have been many recent changes in the Missouri voting laws since our last election that make it more difficult for people to vote. And some of those changes are presently being challenged by the League of Women Voters Missouri and by the NAACP. And we're waiting to hear whether there will be a temporary injunction granted or not. But until and unless that happens, we need to follow the new laws that are in effect today. So I'm pleased to welcome Brianna, who will share with us what we need to know about and do to vote in the November 8th election. And then we will take questions also from the viewers. So be sure to put your questions in the chat feature as we go, and we'll get to as many of those as possible. So with that, welcome Brianna Lennon.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Barbara and Diane. It is an honor for me to be a part of the Holly Burgess Forum because she is the reason I know about AAUW. She was the reason why I got involved with the group and became a member. And I know that she was incredibly active with the league too. So I am very, very happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I do want to go into some of the changes that are in the law, but I want to go in the order of ways that they have an impact on voters directly, because not everyone knows it is a 58-page long bill. It was an omnibus package, so it has a lot of changes in it, some of which aren't even in effect yet. Some are going to be going into effect in January of 2023. So obviously the one that we know where we hear the most about is photo ID, so that's what I want to start with. But there's some other changes in the law that I want to make sure that voters are aware of as well. And I want to talk a little bit about the consequences of some of these changes to the elections administration process. We talk a lot about what the impact is going to be on voters. I want to make sure that people, part of my job is making sure that we have good expectations set for what election day looks like and what election night looks like, and those are going to be impacted by this law as well. So I'm going to start off by talking about the changes that people will see relative to even the primary election, because one of the tricky parts of this law is that it went into effect after the August primary. So folks that went to go vote in August will have a different experience in November. So first and foremost, the biggest change is with photo ID. This law is very narrow when it comes to the types of eligible valid IDs that people can use, and the ones that I want to point out that can't be used anymore. So first and foremost, what can be used? It has to be issued by the state of Missouri or by the federal government. And so that's largely 4 categories. You've got Missouri issued driver's licenses, Missouri non-driver's licenses, US passports, and then military IDs. And there are some, nibbling at the edges types of things. Passport cards are perfectly fine. VA cards are perfectly fine. But if you look at the numbers of what types of IDs are being used, Missouri driver's licenses are going to by far be the number one ID that I expect to see people showing at the polls. And that applies not just to voting in person, but on election day, but it also applies to voting in person absentee. So if you have been used to, you're going to be out of town, or you're going to be a poll worker and you're used to coming into our office and voting absentee in advance, you're going to have to show an appropriate photo ID for that as well. On election day, and this is the part where I like to make sure people are aware that this is an option for voters that don't have the appropriate form of ID. There are blue provisional envelopes. These are envelopes that have been in use since 2017. We have been using them since 2017. And we have not rejected them for unmatched signatures or anything like that. So we have a history of counting them all in this county. And what it is an envelope that you fill out specifically because you do not have the correct form of ID. You get the same ballot. It's all the same ballot type, all the same races that you would be voting on. And you're going to put that into the blue envelope, and 2 election judges of a bipartisan nature are going to fill that out, sign it at the bottom, and then bring it back to our office on election nights. And then we have a verification board that meets after the election that compares the signature on your voter record to the signature on the provisional ballot envelope that you filled out. And if those are the same, then we count that. And like I said, that has not been a reason to reject any of the blue provisional envelopes that we've had in the past. We have counted all of them. So to me, one of the hardest parts about this law is that I don't want anybody discouraged about not having the correct ID and then not showing up to vote, because the alternative to filling out a blue provisional envelope is just not voting at all and not showing up because people are concerned that they don't have the right ID. So that's the photo ID portion of it. You either have a photo ID, or if you don't have a photo ID, you vote this blue provisional ballot. Those are your two options. The important things to know that no longer work as valid IDs, and this sometimes comes to a surprise to people. The voter ID cards that we issue from our office are no longer able to be used for voter ID purposes. The sample ballots that we send in the mail, and out-of-state driver's licenses. So who's that going to affect? A lot of students, a lot of elderly individuals that have let things expire and have not renewed them in years and years. And then folks that have just moved to Missouri haven't had an opportunity to get a Missouri driver's license yet, and still have an out-of-state license. So I do want to make sure that people are aware of that blue provisional ballot option. One of the major questions I get about these IDs too is about the expiration date, because it can get very confusing about whether it's unexpired or expired or what have you. The law says that it's okay if it's expired if it expired after the date of the last general election. So if your license expired or your passport expired after November 3rd of 2020, then you're okay. We can take that, that is valid. So it's more of a, some expired are okay and some are not. But what we've done, just so that it goes a little bit smoother on election day for voters, is we've built that into the check-in process so that election judges have everything that they need to check that, so that voters don't have to keep that memorized. Election judges don't have to keep it memorized. It's just part of the check-in process, is that they will be looking to see if your ID is expired. Other question that we get a lot of, people are concerned that if their Missouri driver's license address does not match the address on their voter registration, they're concerned that that's not going to work. That is not a part of this law. It does not need to be an exact match to have your driver's license and your voter registration address match. What is important is we have your correct voter registration address, because that's how we're figuring out what kind of ballot that you're going to get and where your polling place is. So definitely make sure to update your voter registration address if you've moved, but you don't need to take the extra steps to update your photo ID card for the purposes of voting. It's totally fine that the address on the photo ID doesn't match the address on the voter registration. So that is, I kind of want to go, if I can, in order of that. So that's photo ID, and those are the common concerns that I've heard about it and questions. It also does not need to be a real ID. We hear that a lot too. People are concerned it has to be a real ID. It has to have that little star on it. It does not. It can be a non-real ID. That's totally fine. What impact that has on election day that a lot of folks are going to notice? There's probably going to be lines. Filling out a blue provisional ballot is going to take longer. So if you're a voter that you know you don't have a photo ID, expect to budget a little more time at your polling place, because filling out a blue provisional ballot envelope just takes a little bit longer. It's a long ballot anyway. It's a full two-sided ballot for this election. There's a lot on this. So people are going to take a while to fill that out anyway. Then when you add in filling out the blue provisional envelope, if you're doing it yourself, budget more time. There may be more people in line that are having to fill them out, and it may cause some delays. So just be aware of that. The second thing, very, very importantly, I think in the national attitudes and concerns about fraud and misinformation, is that if we have a large number of blue provisional envelopes, those are not going to be counted on election night. There is no way for us to responsibly count them on election night. They need to be adjudicated. We need a bipartisan team to look through them. That is part of our certification process, and it takes about a week for us to accomplish that task. We have 2 weeks under the law. We try to get it done in about a week. But that process, if we have hundreds of blue provisional ballots, is going to take longer. And if we have a close election in any of the races, and we have more blue provisional ballots outstanding than the margin of that race, It is entirely possible that we can call the election on election night as incomplete, just like it would be any other time. Unofficial results are unofficial results on election night. But if we count those blue provisional ballots and the results flip and the loser then becomes the winner, I just want people to be aware, and I go on the record saying that that is a total natural consequence of this law. It is not indicative that there is a problem. It doesn't mean that anything went wrong or that we had widespread issues at polling places or things like that. This is just the natural consequence of, if there's a large number of people that don't have the right ID that have to vote a blue provisional ballot, they're eligible voters that have done nothing inappropriate, that their ballot can be counted. It just has to be counted later. So those are the two things that I try to make voters aware of. Even if you've got the right ID, it's still going to impact you in one of those two ways potentially. And I actually say this with a degree of optimism, because I want there to be a lot of blue provisional ballots, because the alternative is that all of those voters stay home. If we don't have a lot of blue provisional ballots, it's not because there's not a lot of people in this county that don't have photo IDs. There are a lot of people in this county that don't have photo IDs. And it's very easy, to say that there are a small percentage of Boone County voters that don't have the right ID. That may still be true, but 5% of our 100,000 voter population is still a large number, even if the percentage is small. So I looked at the types of IDs that were shown in 2020, and for out-of-state driver's licenses alone, it was 640 voters. And 640 blue provisional ballots can make or break a close election. So I just like to put that out there as a expectation potentially. I think that it's going to take a few elections for people to get used to that. We in Missouri, with the way that we have our elections administration set up, are very used to, even though we say it's unofficial results, they're used to having the election called that night. And if this is a reason why it can't be, then it's going to take a few elections for people to kind of internalize that. The second thing that the law has changed is the introduction of this new no excuse absentee period of 2 weeks, which is, it's honestly a really great thing. So we have 2 weeks of people that can come in and vote for any reason at all. They don't need to tell us a reason. They don't need special permission. It's just at their convenience. So it is, on the verge of, if not almost exactly early voting, it just has different administrative features that prevent it from being early voting. We're not tabulating as we go. We're not releasing results. So it is still absentee voting, but you don't have to say why you're doing it. In Boone County specifically, we will be doing extended hours during that time. So that 2 weeks starts on October 25th. And it goes through November 7th. And we put this on our website too, so that if you want to share directly from our website, you can. But we will have, throughout the course of that 2 weeks, during weekdays, we'll have the Boone County Commission Chambers, which is on the first floor of the Boone County Government Building, operating as a polling place, staffed with poll workers so that people can come in and efficiently vote. They don't have to come up to the second floor office. We will also have weekend hours in the commission chambers so that voters can come in from 10 to 3 on the weekends for those 2 weekends, October 29th, 30th, and November 5th and 6th, so that they can take advantage of early voting at that point. And we will also have 4 satellite locations on each of those days. So on the 29th, we'll be in Centralia. On the 30th, we'll be at Douglas. On November 5th, we'll be at the Southern Boone Public Library, and on November 6th, we'll be at the Health Department doing drive-through voting. And these are all extensions of things that we did in 2020 that were extremely successful, so we wanted to recreate them for this election as well. We want to make sure that people have an opportunity to utilize this law. And selfishly, it also helps us if we have people taking advantage of voting before the election. It reduces lines at the polls, and it helps, reduce that tension at polling places for our election judges. We'll have 74 polling locations, including 4 central polling locations, which includes the Hurd Center for the November 8th election. But if you know who you're going to vote for and you have a photo ID, there's no reason to wait until November 8th if you don't have to anymore. You can absolutely show up to our office and vote in advance that way. And speaking of absentee, this law has done nothing to change mail-in absentee. I know that there were a lot of concerns that mail-in absentee was eliminated or that there was some major restriction on that. There is not. Photo ID does not apply to mail-in absentee, and the law has not changed any of the requirements for voting by mail for absentee voting. So that period is open right now. The period for mail absentee voting and in-person absentee voting with an excuse started on September 27th. So we've been doing that already. We've had almost 200 voters take advantage of it in the office. We've had about 1,000 voters have a mailed ballot already. So that is absolutely still an option. That's incredibly important for people that are on our permanent absentee list. The individuals that are homebound or have an illness or an injury and cannot make it to their polling location are still able to vote absentee by mail. They do not have to get it notarized. All of that is still in effect. And then lastly, I wanted to bring up a kind of smaller portion of the law that hasn't been as well known, because it's actually one of those interesting, since this is a public policy forum, it is an interesting public policy consequence from a very small change in the legislation. So previously, if you were going to register to vote, you had to be registered to vote in the county that you live in by the 4th Wednesday before the election. That's tomorrow. Tomorrow is the deadline to register to vote for anybody that is brand new to Missouri. It used to be that it was the deadline for anybody that was new to Boone County. But the law has now changed where if you are registered in Callaway and you move to Boone County and you move a week before election day, you can update your address and you'll be perfectly fine. You'll be able to vote at the polls, you'll be able to cast a full ballot, and it won't impact you at all. That is going to impact so many voters, so many students that were registered in St. Louis County that come to Mizzou and forget to update their address. We've had, I can't even count the number of people that have had to drive all the way back to St. Louis County on election day because they didn't realize that they needed to register to vote in Boone County. Now we can actually serve those voters. And so I'm very excited about that particular change. I don't think that people will recognize that the change has actually impacted them, because the consequence is that they will have a good experience instead of a bad one. But it's still a very important one that actually is going to help quite a few voters. So those are the main portions of the law that are going to be impacting people. But I want to hear from people and answer questions about things that they've heard or that they still have concerns about, because I know that there are a lot of misconceptions, but then also, you know, real concerns that people have that I want to make sure that we address. And that way you can tell your, because you are all, I think it's fair to say that everybody on this call is an influencer, especially in their friend group or their colleague group. And I think it's important that you all have the right information so that it gets out into the rest of the Boone County voter world.
Well, thank you, Brianna. Yeah, we'll go to questions. Just to clarify on the updating of address, people can do that even the day of election. Is that correct? Or?
Yes, they have always been able to do that if they are, what's going to happen in this scenario, if you're envisioning what it looks like, if you're registered in St. Louis County, our election judges at the polling place only have the list of eligible Boone County voters. So you're not going to be on the poll pad. You're going to walk up and they're going to say, I don't see you registered. So they're going to call our office And that voter is going to have to come to our office because we're the only ones that are allowed to have the statewide voter registration list, but we'll be able to see, oh, this person is registered, they're just in a different county. And we can pull them in, add them to the Boone County roster, and then they can vote. But they're going to have to do that in our office. That's only on election day. If they make that change the day before, we can process them in enough time that they'll be on the voter roll by the time that they want to go to their polling place on Tuesday.
Great, great. And I'll ask a second question, and then we'll go to viewer questions. Will you have more election workers this year, anticipating longer lines? Do you have more funds for that? How is the election worker pool going? Or
yeah, so we still definitely need more poll workers. The tricky part is that with them being required to be bipartisan, which is a great thing, we are usually most looking for Republican judges because we need an equal number of Democrats and Republicans at the polls. So with 74 polling locations, we'd like to have any from 7 to 10 election judges staffing each of those locations. The larger ones obviously are going to have even more than that. Hearns is going to have way more than 10 to make sure that everything goes smoothly there. And we are trying to make sure we have enough judges so that the polling places that are serving populations that we expect will have larger numbers of blue provisional ballots, that we can physically set up a better process so that they don't have to wait in line, find out at the end of the line, oh, I have to do a blue provisional ballot, like a way to kind of direct them to a more streamlined process at the same polling location. So if you have not worked as an election judge and want to, we are absolutely still taking applications for that. We're doing the training now. Training will continue for a few more weeks, but we are always in need of more election judges.
okay, thank you. I'll jump to the questions. Let's see. You did a really great job of explaining some of the things. So we don't have too many questions right now. So people, please enter questions in chat that you're interested or you think your friends might be interested in. One general question is, what does voting usually look like in this community, and how are these changes going to impact the voters in Boone County?
Yeah, so I think probably the best way to explain it compared to some other states is that we are still very heavily an election day voting population. So we do not have a large opportunity to get people to vote in advance of the election. We have very limited voting by mail. We have very limited voting absentee. These 2 weeks of no excuse absentee are kind of the entry point into seeing what it looks like to have more opportunities to be able to vote in advance. But by and large, 90 to 95% of our voters vote on election day. And that means that we open up a lot of polling locations. We have started this year opening up more central polling locations so that people can vote at a place that's convenient to them, not necessarily where they live, but maybe close to where they work and things like that. So it's very much a wait in line, check in with an election judge, get your ballot. It's a paper ballot based county, paper ballot based state. We have touchscreen accessible voting available where it produces a paper ballot, but still lots of people like to do a hand-marked paper ballot. They fill that out, they put it in the tabulator, and at the end of the night, our supervisors at the polling places bring the ballots back to this office and we release our election results. So it's not a process that is, you liken it to planning for a wedding and hoping that everything works absolutely perfectly on that day, which can be very stressful. I mean, it's one of the reasons so many county clerks want more no excuse absentee voting, is because it relieves some of the pressure of making sure everything is absolutely perfect on election day. Because we have had strange things happen, like gas leaks at polling places and, different things happen a week before the election. Oh my gosh, we have to do an emergency repair in this polling place and we can't use it anymore. So there's a lot of contingency planning. For voters, it means if something happens at their poll and there's lines, then there's lines that they have to deal with for that election. This law may end up increasing some of those lines, which is why I encourage people to take advantage of no excuse absentee voting if they can.
Thank you. Yeah, so the league and our members should encourage their friends to vote early if they have a photo ID at the various locations that you indicated. Let me check to see if there's more questions. Otherwise, I'll go to, I have a few. Wow. I guess we don't have as, I just thought there'd be zillions of questions. So I guess you've been educating people really
There's
well.
one about sample ballots. Sample ballots are that's a really good one. So our sample ballots, there's two things. One is that on the front page of our website, we have this election notice. I don't think I can share to everybody, so I'm gonna have to have, oh no, there it is, everyone. So this does have every single thing. It is not specific to the voter, but if you go to the front page of the website, there is a lookup tool where you can put in your own information. And if you put in your own information, it will show you your polling place, your sample ballot in PDF and in text format. So you can look it up that way. This week, you will also be getting paper sample ballots. They're in the mail this week, so you should be getting them by the end of this week. We also, if we have your email address on file, we'll email out this week your sample ballot. So there's multiple ways that you can get it. And then we have...
And they can bring their sample ballot into the election office when they vote, correct?
Yeah, it can't be used as an ID anymore, but it's definitely a good kind of cheat sheet for if you already know who you want to vote for, fill it out and bring it in. Plenty of people do that, and that way they remember who it is that they wanted to vote for. I always plug, when people call and they want to know where to go for information, I always plug the league's forums as a good way to get acquainted with candidates and things, because we can't, under the law, provide any kind of resources about what the candidates that are running or the questions on the ballot do or what their stances are. And so I always point them to the league and to local media sources so that people can look it up. So, you know, sit down with that information, fill out your sample ballot, and then just bring it with you so you can use that as your guide when you go to vote.
And for the deadline to register is tomorrow, October 12th. Even if people don't have a photo ID yet, they should register and they can get their photo ID after.
Yes. Yeah, you do not need the photo ID to register to vote. So register to vote anyway, and you know, continue the process of getting a photo ID, but definitely don't wait until you have one just to register to vote. Because you can even bring in, if you're getting your driver's license or you're renewing it and they give you that paper temporary one, we can take that too. That fulfills all the requirements. So it doesn't have to be, you don't need to wait until you get the card in the mail.
And someone asked, what is the address for the county clerk's office and what are the hours for early voting during the week? I think you mentioned that, but do you want to mention that again?
So during the week, we will be open from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. on the weekdays. And then I'm dropping our addresses in here. When you get to 801 East Walnut, it's a little, it says East Walnut, but really we like to say we're at the corner of 9th and Ash, because that's the easiest way to distinguish us from the courthouse. We are not in the courthouse. We're in the building next to the courthouse. And for those 2 weeks of absentee voting from 8 a.m. until 5 p.m., we'll be in commission chambers, which is right on the first floor. So when you come into the building, especially if you're coming in the side where there's the amphitheater behind me, which is what I'm pointing there, the amphitheater between the courthouse and the government center, which is where all the marches usually are, and the protests and the things where you see on the news where people are marching at the county. That's where it is. If you come in that side, Commission Chambers is right at that door, and we'll have signs that say vote here and things like that too.
So another person has a question. If I want to vote early, can I get a sample ballot early so I know who is running? Can they go to the office to get it before you mail it? Or do you want to read?
We have those too. If you want to come in, we can definitely give you a copy of them too.
And when did you say the mailing was going out for the sample ballots?
It should hit people's mailboxes by Friday.
So this week, right?
Yep.
Plenty of time to vote early. Another question is, can you review the allowance for an expired ID?
Yes. So the ID, like in the best cases, it's not expired at all. But if it is expired, as long as it expired after the date of the most recent general election, that would be the November general election from 2020, as long as it expired after that. So December of 2020 is okay. All of 2021 is okay. All of 2022 up to this point is okay. So it's really just if you have something that expired in like the middle of 2020 or in 2019, something that hasn't been touched in 2 years, then you have an issue. But otherwise, recent expiration is totally fine.
And there was another early question, which is, why is this an election important?
That's a great question. All elections are important, but this one in particular, I consider it kind of the precursor to the 2024 elections. In the elections administration field, given the fact that we are still answering questions about the 2020 election, and people are still asking us for information about the 2020 election and how that worked and everything. This election is really important to make your voice heard on issues that impact you anyway. I mean, there are a number of constitutional amendments on this ballot that have big impacts on things, but also on, looking from my perspective, looking at candidates and how they feel about the acceptance of election and administration issues and whether they will accept results, whether they win or lose. Those are all important things. It's important in every election to make your voice heard, because it's in my view, the one time that, or one of the only times that your voice is just as loud and as important as anybody else's, because your vote counts just as much as your neighbor's does. So there's plenty of things on this ballot. I would encourage you to look at the sample ballot on our website, but also just consider the fact that, we are at this kind of precarious time where we've got misinformation floating around, and there are things that people are pushing back on the idea that our elections have integrity, and they do have integrity, and we know they have integrity, and our poll workers know that they have integrity, and voting is one way to confirm to people that you have confidence in our democracy.
So that leads to sort of an interesting question. How many dead people have voted in Boone County in the past that we know of, or people that are not or underage or not living in Boone County voting? Can you give us some idea of what the results are?
So we have not had any instances where those things have happened, and I can tell you why. I mean, one is to point to how effective our current laws are anyway in just our voter list maintenance. So we have access in our statewide system to health and human services information, to Social Security Administration information, to the DMV information. And all of those things help us verify to make sure that people are eligible, that they live where they say that they live, that they actually exist and they are verified people. Every voter registration that we have come through gets checked against the Social Security Administration to make sure they are a real live person. And then we mail out those voter ID cards to people. Before it was because it was a nice way to be able to have a voter ID that people could use, but it is also helpful to make sure that people live where they say they live. If we get a voter ID card bounced back to us in the mail with a little yellow sticker from the post office that says this is not a valid address, then we know that that is not a valid registration and we can act on that. So there are ways where we keep our lists up to date anyway. And then when we send information out to our polls, when they get the list of eligible voters, it includes things like whether we've sent an absentee ballot to them, whether they've received the absentee ballot, whether we've received the absentee ballot, whether we know that they've changed their address. All those flags that we keep on our list get sent to the polls too, and it serves as a block so that if somebody has a reason for us to investigate further, the voter has to call us and the election judge has to call us before they can legally issue them a ballot. So there's a lot of accountability and a lot of redundancy built into the system to make sure that we are checking for all those things. And that's not even taking into account that there are 10 staff in my office whose job it is to make sure that we have a up-to-date voter registration list and are, keeping that clean as well.
And would you say that the other offices throughout the state do those similar checks, or is that unique to Boone County?
That is, as with all things at the local level, it sometimes is a question of resources. But the general things, the checking against the Social Security Administration, the things that are built into the system, every county is doing that. Every county, when they get a new voter, is sending them a piece of mail and making sure that they're checked against all of our different lists to make sure that they're correct. Being as part of a statewide voter registration database, it also helps us to not have people registered in more than one county at a time. You can only be registered in one Missouri county at a time, and having that voter database means that if somebody's registered in Callaway and I see them register in Boone County, I can pull them from Callaway into Boone, so they don't have a record in Callaway anymore. It's now firmly in Boone County, and every county is doing that. So there's definitely things, when you hear about elections offices needing more staff or needing more money to buy things like envelopes so that they can send out additional mailers, we're part of some really great resources that the Secretary of State's office can provide. But if you don't have a staff person or the actual physical postage budget to take advantage of some of the resources that we have, then it doesn't mean that they're doing a worse job or anything like that, but we could be doing more. There's things that we could be doing more of, and we're fortunate in Boone County to have those resources to be able to take full advantage of it.
That's good to hear. There's a question. It said, you mentioned misinformation around the voting process and laws. What are the ways your office is working to combat this in addition to events like this?
So that is a great question. As many of these events as possible is definitely one of the ways we're doing it, but we're also trying to be more present on our social media. We created our social media in 2019 in advance of the 2020 election, and that gave us a good foundation for putting out information on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and TikTok. It is notoriously hard to push back on just downright bad or malicious information that's being put out there, because it just spreads faster. It's so hard to tamp down on a lie that's been put out than it is to put out good information. So a lot of it is trying to connect with, trusted sources, working with Mizzou's campus, for example, working with student admissions, but also working with different student groups so that they can educate each other. and then doing things like working with other clerks on putting out good public service announcements and things. My colleague in Greene County, Shane Scholler, and I wrote a letter to the editor that ran in the Missouri Independent, so we could educate people on what the law is. And we're also doing things like trying to create more interesting content like videos and things like that, so that we can reach people that are not always interested in just reading like long pieces of text.
Can you share with us how many new registered voters you've gotten in the last couple months? I know there's the NAACP and many groups are out there, the League of Women Voters, working to register voters. So
Yes.
Can you give us a sense of how that's going?
So between, and this would just be completely new, not updates, but completely new people that we have registered in Boone County from, let's say September 26th, because that's the day before absentee voting started. So that's a pretty good approximation. Between then and now, so for the last 2 weeks, we've had 510 people that are brand new to the county registered to vote.
Great. And do you know how that compares with previous time periods before the election, particularly the November election? I guess you could compare it to I imagine it's much more than before the August election.
It is. So I would say it is pretty comparable with what our numbers have been in the past. And, the hardest part is, I think, our local organizations do a fantastic job of registering people, getting people to update their address. And lots of times the voters that are filling out information, it's changes of address. And so then it looks harder because, you're saying, oh, there's not as many people that registered to vote, but changing their address is just as important. We can't get sample ballots to people or let them know about the processes if we can't reach them. And so every change of address is just as important to me as a new registration.
Great, thank you. We have another question. If you have someone who protests the results of an election, how do you handle that?
So we've been fortunate to not have that, but there is nothing in Missouri law that would prevent us from being able to certify an election. The process after Election Day, once the unofficial results are certified, or once the unofficial results are done, we have a bipartisan team that comes in, and this is what every county does. So this is in state law, every single county does this. Any ballots that need to be adjudicated, provisional ballots, military ballots, anything that came in after Election Day, they will check those and see if they count or not. Then they will conduct a hand audit. So they will hand count 5% of all of the ballots from 5% of the precincts. So for large elections here, for example, that means all the ballots from 5 different polling locations in a large election. They do a hand count to make sure that the number that they get in counting those paper ballots by hand matches the count that the machines got for those same ballots. And we have had I've never seen it not be a 1-for-1 match. It is dead on every time. And if it's not dead on, then we can't certify the election. And every county has those same rules. So at that point, we've made sure a bipartisan team has looked at all of the outstanding ballots. We've made sure a bipartisan team has made sure that the voting equipment has been operating correctly because they've checked to make sure that they count the ballots correctly. And then they sign off on the election. They look at all of the results. They see if there were any weird anomalies and things like that, and they sign off on it. And once that is over, we are considered a certified election. And there is nothing that can prevent us from certifying that election if all of those other checks that we do work out, and there's nothing wrong with them. And then especially for state and federal elections, once we do our certification, we mail that to the Secretary of State's office, and they do a second round of certification with 2 judges. And they're not allowed to do anything, there's no protest rules or anything like that somebody can come in. People can absolutely watch this process. We encourage people to come in and watch this process. It's all open to the public, and it's all posted and transparent. So we definitely want people to come in and watch the process. 9 times out of 10, when people come in, they think it's really boring. And they either say, wow, I didn't realize how locked down this whole process was, or they say, I think you guys got this. I'm not going to stay for the whole thing. So luckily that's been the experience we've had up to this point.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Let's see if there's any more questions. I don't see any. I did want, since there was a question about why this election is important, I wanted to share with the viewers that tomorrow, October 12th, we will have a candidate forum at the library, and you can also watch it on Zoom. That's at 6:30, and that will be for the candidates, state representatives, District 44, 47, and 50. And let's see, that's for Boone County Presiding Commissioner, Recorder of Deeds, Auditor, and Treasurer on October 12th at 6:30 at the library. And then we will have another forum next week, October 19th at the library, and also on Zoom. And that will be with state representatives from District 44, 47, 50, and then information on the ballot issues. And we will have a pro and a con on the marijuana issue. So there's some important issues with whether we should have a constitutional convention, which is really significant. So please join us for those. And we also have a voter's guide. So please share those with your friends and neighbors and read those so that we can have informed voting. So is there anything else? I'll double check for questions. Any more questions?
I just answered Catherine's, which was who makes up those teams that check. The teams are bipartisan. It's under our law, we are actually not nonpartisan in any way. We're bipartisan. So 1 Democrat, 1 Republican make up our verification board. They're in this situation, they are longtime poll workers that have wanted to get more involved. So they've been doing it a long time. And we try to bring in anybody that expresses interest in wanting to know. So for larger elections, we will increase the number of teams that we have, because normally we only need 1 team to do the 5% hand counting and everything else. But especially with the expected increase in blue provisional ballots that our team's going to have to do, it's going to be too much to drop that all on 1 team. So we will have more people. And if you've ever served as a poll worker and want to learn more about being one of our verification teams, feel free to reach out, because we're always looking for new people to kind of train up on this process.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Brianna, for sharing this time with us today and letting us know all this valuable information. Make sure that everyone who has a right to vote and can vote, votes. I hope you get some sleep and rest in between and before the election, and then certainly after the election. So thank you for all your work and for being so proficient and dedicated to this job that's so important. And I just want to let our viewers know that our next Lunch and Learn is November 1st, because normally the second Tuesday would land on November 8th. So we didn't want to have our Lunch and Learn on Election Day. So we've moved it to November 1st, and Local Motion is our guest speaker for that Lunch and Learn program. So thank you very much, everyone. Please encourage your friends and neighbors to get out and do early voting so we don't overload the polls. And you don't have to wait at the polls on election day. So thank you so much. And thank you,
for the
Lauren, and
invitation.
thank you, the University Women's Association.
Thanks, everyone.